this, the Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here tonight with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing tonight?
Good. As I was mentioning to you off camera, I'm exhausted. I was volunteering at this prairie urban farm, which is out at the university farm, and it's an organic farm that raises vegetables for all kinds of people around the city, you know, mainly immigrant groups. And man, physical work outside is exhausting. So how are you doing?
Especially in this smoke, I'm finding I'm tireder at the end of the day and just achier and my eyes are stingier and just from this smoke.
Could be. It was not as bad today as it was the previous
day. It's a little better today, yeah.
And the good news is, because I was asking people on Twitter, like, you know, because we've had rain forecasted and it hasn't come about, but I guess it's really been pouring. Thank goodness in northwestern Alberta today. It's been pouring in places like Grand Prairie, and so that's great news. Alrighty, man. Bruce, we're going to be starting our summer series. Well, I guess it's summer, of the Keep, Hold, or Fold, in which we look at key members of the Edmonton Oilers and we render our judgment on them. Should the Oilers keep them? Should they hold for now and make a decision later this summer? Or should they fold and actively seek to replace this individual? Because you know why we're doing this? Because we like to sit in judgment of other people. That's what we do here. That's our thing.
Yeah, even as it's howling into the wind at certain points, should we keep, hold, or fold on this guy who has a no movement contract and 7 years left on his contract? Well, I think we're probably keeping him, so we might as well say keep. But
yeah,
that's not everybody, but it's a lot of players. But we're obviously going to be focusing in on the guys that are on the hot seat.
The modern NHL, with its long-term contracts, there might be players you might like to fold on, but this is one thing where you definitely take into consideration their contracts and whether it's possible, you know, the consequences of folding on people. You know, obviously the obvious one is Jack Campbell, who, you know, many in the fan base will say get rid of that guy, but you cannot get rid of that guy, and we'll deal with this in a future podcast. But tonight, Bruce, we're dealing with two people you could get rid of because there'd be no cap repercussions if you decided to get rid of these people. They could be gotten rid of, and all you'd have to do is have Daryl Cates pay many $1 million more out of his wallet to replace them and bring in new people. And they are Oilers coach Jay Woodcroft and Oilers GM Ken Holland. You know, there's Kyle Dubas is a free agent right now, Bruce. Think about that. He's won a playoff series now, so that's got to shoot his value up by tens of millions of dollars, no doubt.
Not our money.
Not our money.
Even though people sure seem to mention Ken Holland being the most expensive GM in the NHL anytime they're mad at him. It always seems to come up somehow, even though it doesn't show up on the salary cap anywhere. That's Indeed. Just between him and Daryl Cates.
Yeah, that's the Daryl Cates issue. All right, keep, hold, or fold. Let's start with the GM, since he's the big boss of Mundo. Keep, hold, or fold, Bruce.
I'm going to go straight down the middle with hold, and I think that's what Ken Holland himself is doing, by declaring himself to be playing out the last year of his 5-year contract, with nary a whisper or a sound of him potentially getting renewed, as many management coaches typically are when they have a year to go on their contract. But the whole situation, he's in there for this year, and he may well be in the stage where he's ready to, you know, make one last big push for that cup and then transition, whether upstairs or into an advisor role or whatever. I mean, he's my age, David. He's an old man now, Ken Holland. He's older. He's 4 weeks older than me. So he's got to be getting, you know, kind of tired and iron poor blood, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean,
Bruce, I never see you that way. I don't see people your age that way in the least. And I feel you got another 20, 30 years ahead on the Cult of Hockey podcast. So You're
Right.
a
Well,
keeper. And I think Ken Holland is a keeper here
okay.
too.
Yeah, go for
And
it.
Bruce, I think he's indicated strongly that he wants to stay on, actually.
After? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
like he's keep this year into this coming year. He's not changing
Yes.
his role this year.
Yeah,
So he's
100%.
keep for this. I'm just looking at
Yeah,
this
that's what I
year.
mean by the hold. We'll hold
Now,
him
now,
through this year and then we'll see.
okay. But here's what he said about the in his press conference this past week. He talked about how himself and his coaches and everyone else in the organization are digging in to get better, digging in to win the Stanley Cup. And here's his quote. But there's 31 organizations digging in. That's why when you win the Stanley Cup, boy, do you party. Because it's not a one-year quest. It's a lifetime quest. You know what I mean? You can't party enough when you win that thing. It's a party machine because it's so hard to get your hands on. And I want you to know, I want our fans to know my players are devastated. They're devastated for themselves. They're devastated for the fans. But we're going to get off the mat and we're going to get back at it in September. He just struck me as a guy who is cup hungry, who's got that fire burning to win another Stanley Cup. And, there's lots of people, and I say this in all seriousness, there are many people who are extremely able into their 70s and into their early 80s. And if Ken Holland is taking care of himself, I think that job's a total meat grinder, by the way. Mm-hmm. But, if he's been taking care of himself and he's good to go, I mean, look at Lou Lamoriello. He's 137 and he's still running the New York Islanders. Mm-hmm. So Ken Holland is just halfway through his career at this point. And I think he may stay on. I just think he wants to stay on. And it may be a good thing, Bruce. He seems like an old dog who can learn some new tricks. I mean, he's got a son there who's a big analytics guy. I could see the Oilers, they're already into that. I mean, they're already into, I think they're into the micro analytics, the high resolution stats in a big way. I don't think they're the leading edge in that. But I think Holland is involved in that kind of thinking, that kind of analysis, and certainly has other people who are deeply interested in it. So, which is a big criticism of him, right? And that he might be a little old school. But he's old school in a good way. I think he understands, he has a profound understanding of team building, of what it takes to win a Stanley Cup, to bring together a group of people and to build a team who will compete for a Stanley Cup year after year. And he's done it at Edmonton. So I'm in the keep category. And I'm not averse to him signing a new contract if that's at this point, if that comes up. Although I don't think it would happen till after next season.
Right. Well, yeah, I say let's see how he does next season and reevaluate. And I mean, the team is promising, but it's the time for a cup is now, and it would be a good time for Ken Holland as well this upcoming season, to make a big push at it, and then he can go out on top or not as he chooses. But I thought there were smoke signals suggesting that this will be his last kick at the can, and it could be a total misread by me. But in the meantime, I'd say hold him. He's done some good things with this team, but his record is hardly spotless.
Okay, let's in evaluating Ken Holland and in evaluating Jay Woodcroft, we'll shift formats slightly to the 2 good things, 2 bad things, and 2 numbers for each of them in terms of evaluation. What is your good thing, Bruce, about Ken Holland?
Yeah, well, certainly from the season just past, where the Oilers came on strong at the end of the season and then into the second round of the playoffs. The turning point of the season for the team was the acquisition of defensive workhorse Matthias Ekholm just before the trade deadline in a very big deal with Nashville Predators, in which the Oilers pried loose Ekholm with 3 more years to run on his contract, albeit age 32 to 35, and paid a pretty dear price for him in the person of Tyson Barrie, who was a fairly useful, I'd say, middle of the roster defenseman, and good on the power play, but they had a replacement in mind for him. So they used his cap space But they also had to throw in last year's first round draft pick, Reed Schaefer, this year's first round draft choice. And then they also swapped out a fourth for a sixth, which I'm guessing is exactly what it cost to get a 250,000 retention on Ekholm for each of the next 4 years. Like that's an ongoing commitment from Nashville. So that's what that was probably about. So that's a pretty heavy price, a good defenseman plus basically 2 first-round draft choices for Ekholm. But in Ekholm, they got a guy who really filled a hole and filled a couple of holes on the second or first pairing, depending on how you slice it. I'll just say definitely top 4, where he was basically second in ice time, and the other guy was also a lefty, so they kind of flipped around in minutes from one night to the next, him and Nurse. Either way, the Oilers went from a top 2 team with 2 bottom pairings to a top 4 team with 1 bottom pairing in one fell swoop with that trade. And at the same time, as a bonus, Holland, or the team, chose to insert Evan Bouchard into the role as his partner on the second pairing, and to give him Barry's former function running the deadliest power play of all time. And and Bouchard rose to that challenge, and the pairing between him and Ekholm was just ideal. It really paid dividends in multiple ways. So Ekholm coming in, I thought he provided a little bit of cushion to all the other defensemen, whether they were technically or arguably above or below him on the depth chart. He certainly gave Nurse a little bit of a breather from taking on all of the heavy minutes. And he certainly gave Kulak probably a little more breathing room on the third pairing, where he's very effective, as opposed to the second pairing where he's treading water, Brett Kulak. And he gave room to Vincent Desharnais to shine as his partner on the penalty kill unit. And he, up and down the roster, it seemed like his influence, other than on poor Philip Broberg, who lost his ice time a little bit, the arrival of Ekholm was solid. And the Oilers went from there until the very last 2 games of the season. So from March 1st, when he played his first game, until the middle of May, when he played his last game, the Oilers had 1 2-game losing streak, and that was in games 5 and 6 against Vegas. They'd gone all that time without ever losing so many as 2 games in a row. That the Ekholm trade had so solidified the makeup of the team.
So the main cost of the Ekholm trade was a first-round draft pick this coming draft, correct? Yes. And Reed Schaefer, yes, who was the first pick of the last draft, and that's the main cost of it. And so it's interesting, it's going to be, what is that, a mid-20s pick this time, early 20s pick? Where did the Oilers, something in there?
Yeah, 25 so those picks, or right in around there.
Yeah, those picks, this is apparently a really deep draft. So those picks have about a 1 in 4 chance of being a good NHL player in time. And Reed Schaefer, he was drafted 32nd overall. He's a really big, aggressive forward. And I think he's got about a 1 in 4 chance of becoming a good NHL player as well. At least. So those picks aren't like top 10 picks.
No.
Or top 5 picks, or even, top 15. You're giving up something. If you give them up year after year after year, I mean, you can find good players there, but chances are it takes a while for them to develop, and chances are that they don't. Most of them don't pan out as NHLers, is the truth. So the thing I liked about that trade, Bruce, mm-hmm, aside from his outstanding play, Matthias Ekholm's outstanding play when he got here, is he's got 3 more years on his deal.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a rental. It was, you're trading for a player. You gave up a lot, but you're trading for a player who, in this super important window, when Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are in the last years of their deal, but also Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Zach Hyman, Darnell Nurse, and Evander Kane are still in the prime of their career, or hopefully near prime or prime of their career. These guys are getting older. The clock's ticking on this team on a certain level. So it was imperative that you brought in another defenseman who can really play some hockey in the top four. And now they've got at least three of them in Nurse, Evan Bouchard, and Ekholm. And if Cody Ceci's healthy, maybe they have four. I mean, this is going to be one of the debates of the summer is can you get a better player than Cody Ceci for that amount of money? We won't get into that tonight. But a hell of a trade. I agree. It's like even now it stands out as the master trade of the deadline. I mean, you'd have to look at Carolina, Florida, Vegas, and the other. I mean, Vegas added Barbashev. He's made a difference.
With the cap space from Stone, yes, they did.
That's it. That's the.
But we won't mention that here.
We won't get into that. Bruce, my good thing is I really for years and years and years, one of the defining features of the Decade of Darkness was the utter inability of the Edmonton Oilers to find depth forwards for your third and fourth line who could come in and contribute and make a difference, a positive contribution to the team winning. It was a horror show over the years. And it wasn't just, sometimes it was even higher up players. And I'll just give you a brief list of the Decade of Darkness forwards who were brought in to help for those roles. And either up from the farm team or traded for signed as free agents.
I'm ready.
Ben Eager, Gilbert Brulé, Patrick Thoresen, Ryan Potolny, Jean-Francois Jacques, Joffrey Lupul, Robert Nielsen, Chris Vandeveld, Alice Kodalik, Patrick O'Sullivan, Eric Belanger, Leonard Petrel, Magnus Pyarvi, Darcy Hortacek, Jared Smithson, Niall Yakupov, I got Pyarvi twice here, Boyd Gordon, Mike Brown, Jesse Johansson, Will Acton, Teddy Purcell, Benoit Pouliot, David Deharnay, Rob Klinkhammer, Laurie Korpikoski, Kyle Brodziak, Pontus Aberg, Milan Lucic, Ryan Spooner, Tobias Reeder, Mike Camilleri, Colin Fraser, Jussi Jokinen, Ryan O'Mara, and Valentin Zykov. All right.
Is that in order of games played?
No, it was just, I have an order. It's kind of when they joined the team, generally speaking.
Okay.
Now, listen, when Holland first got here, he also had some tough signings, right? He had some tough signings. Marcus Granlund, Riley Sheehan, Patrick Russell, James Neal, Gaetan Haas, Thomas Yurcho, Joachim Nygaard, Brendan Perlini, Tyler Ennis, Dominic Cahoon, Andreas Athanasiou, Kyle Turris, Colton Sevier, Derek Brassard. There's a lot of guys who didn't pan out initially with him. But Bruce, finally this year, it seemed to work out pretty well. I mean, it started working out a little bit earlier on. They brought in Josh Archibald, who was a fairly decent player for a couple of years. And then they bring in Zach Hyman as a free agent and Evander Kane as free agents. And the Kane thing especially was absolutely massive for this franchise. I still believe it changed the vibe around the team. And it was a really controversial move that some fans really hated. It was a move that many GMs wouldn't make, but he made it, and it's paid dividends on the ice for this team. And Evander Kane, since he's been here, by all accounts, has been pretty positive member of this community. So, but he's also there's this year we on the bottom lines we saw Ryan McLeod, who was drafted by Chiarelli but promoted and developed under Holland, Derek Ryan, who was signed by Holland, Warren Fogle, who was traded for by Holland, Matthias Janmark, signed by Holland, Klim Kostin, traded for by Holland. Now, there's a couple players, Puljujärvi and Yamamoto, who are around this year who were kind of holdovers also from Chiarelli. But there's just a number of these guys, and I'm thinking mainly of Kostin, Ryan, Fogle, and Janmark, who just really helped those bottom ones. And Nick Bjugstad, he's on the list as well. I got to add him here to my chart. First, he did a really solid job in rounding out the depth of this team. And it's not why the Oilers started the playoffs. Those, the line of Fogle, Ryan McLeod, and Derek Ryan was one of the Oilers' best lines. And it's been a long time since we've been able to say that about a line other than the first or second line on this team, that the third line in the playoffs really came through. and made a difference. And Kleen Koskinen and Yamamoto, when they were together, as kind of a fourth line, that also worked out for a few games. So I just, good for Ken Holland. He was finally able to identify a whole group of players who are panning out as bottom line players for the Edmonton Oilers. And even Devon Shore in the second half of the year played really strong hockey. I don't know if he played well enough to earn another contract, but he played well when he got in the second half after a fairly mediocre previous 12 months, I'd say. So
I suspect they'll offer him 1 year at the minimum.
Sure,
and
maybe.
Yeah, and I suspect he'll take it. And it may even have a two-way component in it, or because there's every chance he'll spend time in the AHL. I looked it up today. He got moved 10 times in a 7-week span this year, up and down to Bakersfield and back.
Wow.
Officially 10 times in a 7-week span. And that didn't count one time that he spent on waivers as well, which was a different kind of transaction. So yeah, David, in your pick of the forwards, I mean, since Holland got here in 2019, the bottom 6 or bottom 9, depending on what they're doing with McDavid and Draisaitl, whether they're together or apart. But when they're on the bench, the last 3 years, the Oilers scored 39% of the goals when they were on the bench, which is atrocious because they were playing, good, better part of half the game without the big guys on the ice. And this at 5-on-5. This year, they soared all the way to 55%.
Wow.
Yeah, like 50% is fantastic from your bottom 6. If your bottom 6 is break even, then your top guys are doing the damage, but 55% is off the charts. And then there were 57% in round 1 of the playoffs, and then in round 2, on your small sample, 3, 4, 7 against 30%. But that was one of a few things that went wrong. But during the season, a big part of the Oilers' success, including against the Kings, was that their third and fourth, and sometimes second, third, and fourth lines were limiting the damage. Especially they were good on the defensive side of the puck. Just just under 2 goals against per 60 this year, and 1.3 in the playoffs. Like really sort of clamping things down. But to be honest, it was the big boys in the playoffs who didn't post the numbers that they needed offensively. So, I mean, they got good numbers, but not that good.
What is your bad thing about Holland, Bruce?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, you have the kind of thing I was going to take, but I guess I don't know whether I really want to blame this on Holland, but because I didn't disagree with either signing when they happened, but the extensions, significant raises of Kyle Yamamoto, Jesse Puljujärvi, and you could argue Evander Kane if you stick with my main discussion point, which is that in each case their salaries went up substantially and their production went down fairly substantially. Last year, Yamamoto had 20 goals, Puljujärvi had 15, and they were both making $1.175 million. This year, they both got bumped to the $3 million range. Yamamoto for 2 years, JP for 1. This time, Yamamoto scored 10 goals and Puljujärvi got 5. They were both down 10 goals from a year ago, making, 2.5, almost 3 times the cap hit. So in terms of getting value for money, it just didn't happen. And to lay it all on the feet of the GM is probably not fair, but at the same time, he had other options. I mean, he could have let Puljujärvi walk as a restricted free agent and use the $3 million for something else. And at the time, it seemed a no-brainer. Well, I'll keep this guy. He showed so much promise last year. He got sick, and then his game fell off after that. But this year, he just never had it, and he did well, I think, in the end, to be able to simply trade off that entire contract and not have to retain anything at all on it, and put that $3 million to use that right at the deadline. So he kind of saved himself there. But in both cases, and again, the Kane contract, like Kane this year, he scored 16 goals in 41 games. So that's a 30, just over 30 goal pace. And then in the playoffs, he had just, what was it, 2 goals and 3 assists, 3 goals and 2 assists in the playoffs. And he was a minus in the regular season and a minus in the playoffs. And his, it wasn't just that he wasn't finishing, but his passing, his defensive game wasn't that strong. No, he was very, very noticeable as an intimidator, going out there and bashing bodies and having that swagger that you like so much. But it wasn't backed as much by results compared to last year when he just went nuts in the playoffs with 13 goals and he was doing all kinds of damage on the score sheet. So all three of those guys, he took a $3 million raise, Evander Kane, from what admittedly was a very low cost prior. But if you look at the fullness of his contract, you could say, well, that's another guy who didn't quite deliver up to the level expected. And clearly in his case, the excuses / reasons that he wasn't able to perform, like getting a great big gash in his wrist from a skate, or getting his ribs busted, or getting a finger or thumb broken in the playoffs. I mean, all those things are mitigating factors. But at the same time, you're looking at your GM and saying, well, you're the guy signing the 31 or 32-year-old power forward to 4 5-year deal. And, Vander Kane right now is the same age that James Neal was when he arrived in Edmonton. Another power forward who had been very good for a very long time, but he was just getting very near the end of the line, and it came up quick. So I'm going to say jury's still a little bit out on that one. And the Yamamoto and Puljujärvi signings proved to be poor investments for this past season. So I'll take them as my collective bad thing.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. When all those contracts were signed, the only one I was a little bit thinking about was the second year on the Yamamoto deal.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, is that necessary? Like, is that really wise? Did you need to do that? Although he did have a good season, he didn't have a good playoff last year necessarily. Though just like this year, he made some big plays in the playoffs last year, and he made some big plays in the playoffs this year, like 1 or 2, right? He scored that huge goal against LA, and last year he set up Tyson Barrie on a big goal. But that was the only thing I would have. The Puljujärvi contract, I thought that was good to bring him back, and the Kane deal, I was in favor of that as well. So it's hard for me to, I just would note that in making any criticism of any of those moves. I think the people you are right to be wary of Kane's future. Power forwards in the NHL have a best before date, and it's usually about 30 or 31. And we'll see. I mean, Kane is an amazing physical specimen. There was extreme extenuating circumstances this year in terms of the injuries that he suffered. So I'm certainly but hockey players do break down. Their bodies do get beat up. They do get injuries that they can't recover from. And that happens most often as they get to be Kane's age. So we'll see how this goes in the next few years. He does present a little bit more than either Neal or Lucic in terms of the intimidation factor. Like, even if he's less of a player than he was in his first year in Edmonton, which is likely. I just always felt that like Lucic intimidation factor was pretty much gone by the time he couldn't play anymore, because he just couldn't keep up. He couldn't make a hit. Kane is still fast enough. He just lays on wicked hits. Yep. I mean, the hitting he did on Peter Angelo in that series was enormous. So he did bring that aspect of his game and will going forward. But you're right, it's something to be concerned about. My bad thing versus the obvious thing, and this is also a deal which at the time I supported. I was leery about, you just never know. But the Jack Campbell signing, 5 years at, I think it's $5 million, and it's got 4 more years to go. That's a lot of money. The Oilers needed another goalie at the time. They were in competition for a few other goalies. Who ended up in Washington? The Colorado goalie. What's his name?
Darcy Kemper.
Darcy Kemper. I don't think he had a very good year either. There was another Vili Husso. I think he went to Detroit and had not a bad year. So anyway, the Oilers were in the running. They needed another goalie. This was the market price for Campbell. And as I noted at the time and continue to note, he had about 5 or 6 pretty good pro seasons in a row in terms of save percentage. He had a bad second half in Toronto, but he had also apparently been playing with a broken rib. So, when you make bad free agent contracts, it can kill your team. I mean, we saw this with Lucic signing. That was such a devastating blow to the Edmonton Oilers to have a player earning that amount of money who just could not come close to performing at that level. And the Oilers have a number of high contracts now. So it would make sense that at least one or maybe one or two aren't going to work out. I mean, some of them worked out. Like the bang for buck they got in the regular season, at least from Nugent Hopkins and Hyman, was out of this world. And, some of them aren't going to work out each year, but you just need them to, and they often won't work out because of injury in that particular year. But you do need these big deals to work out. And obviously, Jack Campbell, if he has another year, this coming year, like this past year, I mean, then you are going to be looking at buying him out or moving him at huge cost to your team. And it will be a very difficult thing for the Oilers to dig out of, although not impossible.
Yeah, difficult. I mean, sometimes these goalies, they're voodoo, as we all know. I mean, for years, people pointed to the Sergei Bobrovsky 7 years at $10 million kind of maximum contract that he got from Florida and laughed. Well, who's laughing now? Mostly Florida fans, because Bobrovsky's looking like Dominic Hasek in net for them these days as they're roaring through towards the Stanley Cup Finals. I'm not sure how there was 1-0 when I left the game tonight. We were podcasting on Monday evening. But anyways, you never know when they might bounce back. But there are several suggestions of the Campbell contract that maybe was a bad bet based on information that was available at the time. And that certainly being Campbell's second half of the season, his playoffs, and the fact that he never really recovered his form at any point. Just to expect that he'd bounce back when he's healthy, he'll be just great again, was maybe he was good in Toronto's system and maybe not so well designed for Edmonton's. There's lots of factors at play when goalies change teams, but often they have a poor first year and then they bounce back in the second year. And that's certainly what Ken Holland is praying for with Jack Campbell.
Here's Bobrovsky's. So his last 3 years in Columbus, he had a save percentage of .931, .921, and .913. So he was going down each of the last 3 years, but they were still pretty high, very high. His first year, these are his first 4 seasons in Florida, save percentage of .900, .906, .913, and this past season, Bruce, .901. This is a goalie making $10 million a year. But now in the playoffs, .935, .935. So, like you say, it's hard to know. And maybe, we'll get to the playoffs with Campbell. Maybe Campbell was ready to turn it around even as quickly as these playoffs, and we just didn't get that chance because of decisions by the coach. But yeah. Okay, what's your number with Ken Holland, Bruce?
Yeah, my number is a peculiar one, and it's just to do with Holland's goaltending. And this is the 4th year out of 4 that his starting goalie, and specifically his goalie who started the playoffs, was the lower paid of the 2 netminders by a substantial percentage on his payroll. Now, we'll grant him that he came in here and inherited Peter Chiarelli's last blunder, which was the 3-year extension to 30-year-old Rico Koskinen, who had 30 NHL games under his belt, and somehow warranted a 4.5 million times 3, which was untradeable because he had no history. So they couldn't even move him along based on what he'd done in the past. So he was kind of saddled with the 4.5 million. And he brought in Smith at 2 million plus bonuses, and he played 38 games to 33 the first year over Koskinen. Then he brought Smith back at 1.5 million, and he played 34 games to 25, including all four in the playoffs. And then in 21-22, he brought Smith back for a third different contract for Mike Smith, 2 years at 2.2, and he played 43 games, including all 16 in the playoffs, compared to Koskinen's 43, but 0 in the playoffs. And each year, and then this year, he brings in Jack Campbell as his expensive free agent, and Campbell plays 34 games, and the NHL minimum rookie goalie Stuart Skinner plays 48 games. So again, you have this weird situation in net where the higher compensated guy by a large margin is wearing a baseball cap much more often than not. And that's happened now in 4 out of 4 years under Ken Holland, including this year's complete flip of the goalies from at least from number 1 and 2 last year, the two veterans. Skinner did play a bit, to this year's combo. And yet the exact same thing happened with the net minding, that the lesser paid guy got substantially more of the ice time. And then, of course, for Skinner, I said 48-34 in the playoffs, 12 starts to 0 for Skinner. So 60 to 34 overall.
Bruce, here's a Rico Koskinen stat under the goalies are voodoo category. This year in the regular season, he signed in the Swiss League with Lugano. He played 33 games, and he had a mediocre 900 save percentage. He's played 8 games in the playoffs, and he's got a 937 save percentage. Rico Koskinen
Dialed it up.
So he did. He just never. It's just so weird. With goalies teams. Like anyway. Yeah. All right, my number, Bruce, just real quick, 4 for 4. He's been Oilers GM for 4 years. The Oilers have a 4 out of 4 year playoff record, and the save percentage has gone from, like, in the regular season, I think it was like 580 something points percentage in their first year, and it got up to 650 something, I think, this year. So the team is trended up significantly under Ken Holland. Moving on to Jay Woodcroft, Bruce. Keep, hold, or fold?
Oh, I'm very bullish on Jay Woodcroft, and I'm keep all day long. Keep him for the rest of the 2020s.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I will say keep him definitely. What year is he on his contract here?
This was his first of a 3-year deal.
All right. Yeah, I mean, the Oilers have done really well under Jay Woodcroft. There was hardly a negative thing to say about his coaching until a few negative comments came up, which we'll get to regarding this playoff run. And anytime you have a brutally disappointing playoff run like the Oilers just had, that's going to happen. But I agree, he's obviously a keeper. Bruce, what is your good thing about Jay Woodcroft?
I like his flexibility and his ability to work with what was this year essentially a 21-man roster for the Oilers. That's a pretty short-handed roster when you're used to 23, but for cap concerns primarily. Edmonton started the season, went much of the season with just 21 players, 12 forwards, 70, and 2 goalies always. And depending on which player may not be available from one game to the next, if somebody got nicked up or got the flu or something, he could change in a heartbeat from a 12-6 forwards to defensemen, sort of your standard game night roster, 4 forward lines, 3 defense pair, to the 11-7, which is sort of the unorthodox ones with the prime numbers of forwards and defensemen. So no sort of natural sets that involve everyone. And the ways that he used the 7th defenseman to his advantage, and the ways that he used the hole on the 4th forward line to his advantage, The Oilers were actually a little bit stronger and they had a better record when they went with or they have during Woodcroft's regime here, have done better in general with the 11-7 roster than they have with the 12-6. But his ability to switch from one to the other, and I'm thinking of one case where they went on the road and they played just a brutally hard game in Los Angeles, and they went with the 11-7 and every trick that Woodcroft had to maximize his defensemen, to spot in his weaker players, to double shift McDavid and Draisaitl, and they won a crucial game in Los Angeles, 3-1. And the very next night they went to Anaheim and they switched to a 12-6. And I'm thinking, well, geez, why would you switch out from that winning lineup? And as the game went along, it became more and more obvious. Well, he's not having to double shift McDavid. He's not having to double shift Draisaitl. He's able to just roll his lines. He's able to roll his pairings. His team is good enough to beat Anaheim just straight up. There's no reason to be further taxing these guys. This was a back-to-back. And so he sort of played the one team to the strategic maximum advantage, and then he played the other team straight up. So he did not push any of his, bigger players on 2 consecutive nights, and the Oilers rolled to 2 consecutive road victories in the process. And I thought it was just sort of brilliant use of both stratagems in a very short interval. It's just one highlight of how he handled that.
My good thing with Jay Woodcroft, Bruce, has been his development and use of younger players. And he has not been perfect. There's been criticism of him, for instance, this year not using Dylan Holloway enough. Although I think Woodcroft in his press conference said, they might have used him more, but he got injured in Bakersfield when he went down there. So by the, that was a factor. You could say Philip Broberg, it's taken a while for him to break in. At the same time, the Oilers had weirdly good health on their defense core this year. And there was normally Philip Broberg probably would have played 75 games with normal injuries, but nobody got hurt. And how rare is that? So, in both cases, but Philip Broberg got a fair amount of ice time, a fair amount of games, and was often the 7th D-man. So I think both players are developing nicely. They haven't been rushed. That's for sure. Definitely and not. They should be ready. I see both of them as good to go. I like both of those players, but man, he has done a good job with some other players. Evan Bouchard, case in point. One of the benefits of the Ekholm trade was moving out Tyson Barrie, a very good player for the Oilers. But it was time. It was time, Bruce. Evan Bouchard was ready for more ice time. And we don't know how much of the trade was made perhaps on a recommendation from the coach that Evan Bouchard's ready, but you'd have to think he'd be consulted on that. And if he said, no, we've got to keep tight. Bouchard's is not ready for that. But Evan Bouchard proved he was more than ready for that. And he's 23. He just exploded as an attacking player. I think I read somewhere saying like there's a chance at the end of the year they were saying there's a chance Evan Bouchard could be an elite NHL attacker. I mean, there's a chance he could be. He is an elite NHL attacker right now,
on
Bruce.
The power play.
Ryan McLeod worked his way up and has played a big role on the third line. Stuart Skinner, a huge role, took over as the goalie. Clean Costin came in, got regular ice time, and became a significant contributor. Vincent Desharnais, a little older, but a rookie nonetheless, came in and contributed until I think his game was taken away by the reffing in the playoffs. I think they weren't going to let him get away with any of the stick fouls he was getting away with regularly in the regular season as a rookie. And it did take away his confidence, but they stuck with him. And by the end of the Vegas series, he was playing okay again.
He was.
Now there's 2 players, Bruce, Jesse Puljujärvi and Kailer Yamamoto, who haven't panned out necessarily under Woodcroft. But I'm going to say this about those 2 under Woodcroft. They were given every opportunity to succeed, in my view. And and this is what I said when Puljujärvi, you can say what you want about the player. He got every chance to show what he could show in Edmonton. And if he does make it in another city, good for him. But it's not because he was ever going to make it in Edmonton. There was no indication he would ever turn it around in Edmonton. And with Yamamoto, it's very close to the same thing now, where he has been given every chance in a feature role to excel with the Edmonton Oilers. And if Edmonton decides to move on from him, and he's done better in Edmonton than Puljujarvi did, but if they decide to move on from him, we will know exactly what we're giving up and what we could expect in the future in Edmonton from Kailer Yamamoto, I believe. Maybe he'll become, maybe if he gets traded or bought out, it will spur on some kind of massive development in him, some change in him, necessary change, which will push him into being a top 6 forward in the NHL. He's gotten that chance at Edmonton, and Woodcroft gave those two players that chance. So it's not a situation where sometimes you just feel like a player just was treated poorly and didn't get that opportunity. But both of them did.
Some of the Finnish followers of the Oilers, which I'm not sure if they're following the Oilers anymore now that the Finns are few and far between, but they thought Puljujarvi got a little bit of a raw deal from Woodcroft. I think specifically this season. Last year he played well in the opening months under Dave Tippett, and then he got COVID in Seattle just before Christmas of 2021, and he came back off of that list, and he was just never the same after that. I heard stories that he had long COVID. He certainly had another injury that he was coping with, and then this year it just all went away. And if you want to blame that on Jay Woodcroft, well, fill your boots. But he went on to Carolina, and none of it's come back in Carolina. I watched him play a couple games there, and he was playing his position fine. He was forcing pucks to get coughed up, but when it came to his stick, there was just nothing. There was no creativity. It was just like it left. And that was what he was, a large part of the excitement was what Puljujarvi as a 17-year-old MVP of the World Juniors was, this is a great big guy who can skate and create plays and score goals and, barge around the wing, how they're going to be able to contain him. And, and he's Valerie Nichushkin from the year he scored 0 goals and got 0 penalty minutes in Dallas before he got a new address and he turned his game around. And hopefully that's what happens there. But like I say, if you want to blame that on the coach, he was given ice time based on results, and Yesel just wasn't bringing the results. And he wasn't last year he was getting the outscoring results where his line was doing great, even if he wasn't getting 1,000,000 points. This year, yeah, the Oilers were getting outscored when he was on the ice, and he was
ineffective this year, Bruce, as a two-way player. Yeah. He was one of the worst Oilers wingers as a two-way player, after having been one of the best the year before, which is why we were in his camp, which is why we wanted him to get a new contract, which is why we were good with that, and why we were hopeful heading into this year. And maybe he did really play well that season, and maybe he can do that again for another NHL team. Maybe he can figure it out, because he has some. He's big, he's fast, he's a hardworking forechecker. He's not a bad defensive player, so he might still have a future in the NHL. It wasn't going to be in Edmonton, obviously. Bruce, your bad thing about Jay Woodcroft.
Yeah, I'm going to harp on something that may even have come up in our last podcast with Kurt. I'm trying to remember now exactly who got what, but I think Woodcroft's handling of his goaltenders, specific in the Vegas series, it was less than fully effective, and it was like he explained himself on this just fine on the Bob Stauffer Oilers Now show lately about how Skinner would have a bad game and they'd go back to him and he'd bounce back and have a good game. Well, and that happened in the LA series where Jack Campbell came in and played 50 minutes of one goal against hockey to keep Edmonton in the game. They ultimately won with a big comeback, 5-4 in overtime. And he went back to Skinner the next game, and the Oilers won. I didn't think Skinner was that great, but he played well enough to win, and then everybody was vindicated. Well, after game 3 of the Vegas series, Skinner got blown out in Edmonton. Campbell came in, basically shut the door. Back to Skinner in game 4, and he won. So another nice bounce back for Skinner. But then game 5, he had another poor game, and he was gone after second period with 4 goals against again. And Campbell came in the third period, and he was terrific. And kept the Oilers at least within spitting distance in the third period. And by this time, I'm thinking to myself, well, and we talked about the podcast that night. Who do we start in that next game? And the idea was, Well, Campbell keeps coming in and slamming the door after Skinner has given up 3 or 4. At a certain point, you got to say, well, I love the coach's belief in the young goalie, but where's his belief in the old goalie? He keeps saying, well, we're a two goalie team and stuff. Well, Campbell, from April 1st to the end of the season, he let in 3 goals in basically 4 hours of play. 3 goals against in 4 hours. And he never got one start in the playoffs. And to me, game 6 at minimum, some people argue game 4 of the Vegas series was the time to bring him in. What I do know is goaltending beat them in that series, and Edmonton never really did anything about it.
Bruce, I think your critique is fair. I don't think goaltending was the main reason they lost that series. I think, and I wrote a post on this,
Mm-hmm.
I would have agreed with you before I dug into the numbers, but you look at the grade A shots differential in that series,
Mm-hmm.
it was exactly the same as the
Mm-hmm.
LA series, and it was exactly the same as the regular season.
In
The
favor of
Oilers
the
were
Oilers.
up about 2.5, 3 grade A shots a game, which should be enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not total dominance. It's not going to guarantee you under all circumstances. So yes, I think that goaltending was one factor in losing that series, but I think the main thing was the Oilers were getting all kinds of grade A shots on net. And Vegas had good goaltending, but I didn't see Dominic Hasek standing on your head goaltending. I saw some good puck luck, some good bounces. And even in that 6th game in the first period, I mean, Nugent Hopkins, in the first period, the Oilers are up 2-1. Nuge comes off the wing, and he just raises his shots a little higher, and it goes over the blocker. It's in. Then we have Yamamoto charging into the slot. He gets poke checked, but the puck bounces off a Vegas defenseman, hits the goalie right into Hill by good luck, and and then it bounces away. Nuge is charging in. No one's on him. If the puck goes to him, it's a goal, and it's 3-1. Just before then, Hyman put the puck into the slot. It hits a stick and almost goes through the goalie's legs. And then Kane is charging in, and there's no one on him. And the puck it just doesn't come right to him. It's a wide open net. If it doesn't, it's a goal for sure. These are the moments. This is why this series is so frustrating fundamentally, I think, is because we all saw an Oilers team that was good enough to win. And there was small things. And I'm going to get to another one that was a problem. I think there was the goaltending. But fundamentally, I think we saw an Oilers team that was a little bit better than Vegas, is the truth, in terms of run of play. And they couldn't get it done despite that. And that's just hockey. Hockey is a game which is governed as much as any sport, any of the major sports, probably more than any others, by puck luck. And there's been studies on this. I put a YouTube video on my blog post on this, where a professor looked into it and makes I thought, a fairly convincing argument about puck luck being, hockey is more of a game decided by luck than other sports. And this was a really hard example for the Edmonton Oilers. And I think it's why we're all so frustrated, because they were so close and they were so good, but they couldn't get it done because they didn't get the bounces. So,
well, Vegas got I think the winning goal in that last game, where they fired in a shot on Skinner and it hit him, and it went straight up into the air and came straight down behind him and landed right in the blue paint about a foot from the goal line. And, whether you want to call that a bad rebound or just more puck luck or whatever, I mean, it was actually a pretty good stop he made on a hard shot. It wasn't like he had a lot of chance to direct it, but man, oh man, I mean,
and it
Aiden
looked
Hill's
like
rebounds were not landing on sticks of opponents for tap-ins. Let's put it that way.
But I just think it's luck. I don't think it was like Aiden Hill's this great goalie, like all due respect. Watching those plays, and Bruce, this is my experience. You and I have watched a lot of grade A shots many times. We've done this video review, and what has struck me just repeatedly is how little difference there is between a grade A shot and a goal. And it's just often a matter of luck. It's often a matter of where the puck bounces that particular moment. If it's through a screen, if he hits a defenseman, ticks off a stick ever so slightly, if it's through a defenseman's legs, if the rebound goes here as opposed to there, like by an inch or a half an inch, or if the goalie's pad is a half inch here, it's just so close. And that, So yeah, the best teams in hockey tend to win, but not even in a 7-game series.
Yeah.
So the goal of Woodcroft and the Oilers, their focus now is to be that much more dominant. So even if they get in a tight series like this, they'll be so strong defensively that they'll still win. I mean, that's their whole focus now, is to be every good on the attack, but crank it up on defense just one more notch, so they can win that kind of series that's close. They just got to push their advantage, and I do think it's an advantage that they have. They were a better team than Vegas. And one of the ways they can do this is my bad thing on Jay Woodcroft. And there's I'm not sure, like I don't watch enough of the other teams to say this for sure, but in the old days, as recently, recent years, teams used to go with checking lines, playing heavy and hard minutes. And they would play those checking lines against the top line of the other team. And they would play them in the last minute of the period. And, for years, certainly during the decade of darkness and until this year, the Oilers did not have a checking line. They could never find a center who could get the job done. They could never find wingers. They could never come close to finding anybody. And this year they found them, and they found a number of players who are candidates. Matthias Janmark was a candidate till he got hurt. Nick Bjugstad was a good candidate. But they settled on Derek Ryan, Warren Foegele, and Ryan McLeod, who in terms of the shots was a dominant line against Vegas. But Jay Woodcroft and always went power against power. He always went with his top two centers, McDavid and Draisaitl, either on the same line or on other lines, or he tried to get a second line with Nick Bjugstad, Nugent Hopkins, and Hyman to go against the power lines. So this was the theory, and this is a really good theory too. Like, I'm not saying this is a terrible idea. The idea is your best players, if you're going to win in the NHL, your best players must learn to beat the other players at even strength. And there's going to be some hard lessons along the way. And there was some really hard lessons this year for especially the Draisaitl line in Game 6, where they got outscored on 2-0 against the Eichel line in the key game. And Draisaitl was forlorn after the game. So now you could just say, okay, lesson learned. Leon's going to come back. They'll all come back, and they'll have learned, and they'll play better defensive hockey. And yeah, they're going to have to do that. But you could also go a different route, and you could have had the McLeod line out against the Eichel line in that series. And I just wonder if they had done that, like in terms of coaching strategy, I just wonder if that might not have gone better for the Oilers, where they put that line out there and their job was just to nullify. And you have Derek Ryan, who is as smart as defensive hockey player as there is in the NHL. You have Foegele, who was playing at a high level of two-way hockey, and McLeod, a little bit iffier. Maybe this was their hesitation. They just thought Ryan McLeod doesn't have the defensive toughness and fundamentals to be able to handle Jack Eichel. That would have been. It was a tall order, and I can see them backing away from that. But I personally think he was probably a better bet than Bjugstad or Draisaitl. But
Bjugstad wasn't fast enough to handle.
He wasn't.
Jack Eichel.
Yeah, so McLeod might have risen to that challenge, and I would have gone with it. Personally, that's what I wanted to see. And I think if you go listen to the previous podcast, I'm not just saying this now. This is something that I was saying previously. So to me, that would have been an interesting strategy. I don't know if it would have worked. I would have liked to seen it tried more in this coming year. Try it in 20, 30 games this coming year. Go for it. See if you can get a checking line.
Yes. Yeah, I like the 20, 30 game trials, and there's lots of things you could do in the first half of next season to see exactly what you've got. But the Woodcroft's rationale was that he liked the matchup of McLeod against William Karlsson specifically, and that they were trying to deploy Karlsson against McDavid so he would counter with McLeod. But what that meant was that after every TV timeout, McDavid would be on the bench because Bruce Cassidy just kept rolling William Karlsson over the boards after every TV timeout. And, so I think Jay maybe lost a little bit of the bigger picture there in terms of the matchup of the moment. Here's an idea: put McDavid out for a shift against Karlsson after the TV timeout, score, And then maybe Bruce Cassidy has to do something about it, how he wants to
Yes.
do his matchups, So,
Yeah.
but that scoring part was kind of missing, unfortunately. So they only got
Yeah.
nine 5-on-5 goals in 6 games. So just not enough.
What is your number, Bruce, for Jay Woodcroft?
Yeah, I'm going to go with 683. And that's Woodcroft's winning percentage as an NHL, sorry, points percentage, cockamamie point system percentage as the NHL head coach since being called up in February 10th of 2022. He's now coached 120 regular season games with 76 wins, just 32 regulation losses, and 12 other losses for 683 points percentage. That's tied with Carolina Hurricanes, a very, very good team, for second overall in the NHL since that date, with only this year Boston Bruins, who set some records in the regular season this year, being ahead of both of those teams. So right up there with the NHL elite, in other words. And the Oilers had lots of other sort of underlying statistics this year that suggest that they were the elite team in the Western Conference during the regular season, but they just didn't get the points. The way the point system worked was against the Oilers this year, and they had, but they're still right there, second in the conference, and improving. And both times the team was great in the second half of the season, which basically was Woodcroft's whole time. The first year he was here, and then this year they really picked it up fast the midway point, and we're just in the fourth quarter almost unbeatable. So his record in regular season and playoffs a little, 14 wins, 14 losses in 2 years, but 3 playoff series wins, including, at least one in each season. So, success there, if not quite enough of it to satisfy all of us quite yet. But he's been the coach for 15 months, David, and I think he's just developed a glistening track record to this point. Even as we've left with some questions after the Vegas series, I have supreme confidence that he's going to learn from that too, and be a better, stronger coach for it.
Yeah, and I was listening to his interview with Bob Stauffer on Friday, and it was him that
Mhm.
brought up, in a very careful way, the point that I then made more strongly in my own post, that there was some shooting luck that played a factor in there. He was very, very
Definitely.
careful in saying that, but it was a fair comment on his part, I think. So, and I want, like, he noted that, and I think it was reasonable to do so. He didn't stress it. And he stressed the fact they got to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, but it was a good point. And what he did stress was team defense, how that's got to get better. And I think that is how you're going to win this kind of series, which is between two, where the Oilers are the better team, but they're not so good that they can't be beat, obviously. They're not so much more dominant that they didn't give up a lead in every game, for instance, which was really frustrating.
But they lost.
So they do have to crack the whip on defense and in net. They got to get better at both things, and I think they're going to do that. I think that's going to be the modus operandi of the theme of the coming year. Bruce, my number with Woodcroft, when Dave Tippett's last season with the Oilers, he coached 44 games, and the Oilers were pretty mediocre in those 44 games. They were starting to become a sieve on defense in his last game, giving up too many odd man rushes. The grade A shots differential in Tippett's 44 games was 1.3, plus 1.3 for the Oilers. So they were just marginally a whisker better, a hair better than, somewhat better than the opposition teams in his last half season with the Oilers before he got fired. As soon as Woodcroft got hired up, they were plus 2.1 for the rest of the year. This past year in the regular season, they were plus 2.9 grade A shots per game, almost 3 a game. In the playoffs, they were plus 2.8 per game. So they have become a dominant team. That's almost like 4 grade A shots equals 1 goal. So they're up 3 grade A shots a game. It's 0.075 goals per game that translates to. That's a pretty good margin in the NHL. And I just think they're headed in the right direction. Clearly, under Jay Woodcroft, he's done a fantastic job. So, and that's reflected in this grade A shots differential.
Yep, just trending up. And you'd like to think, if you get 3 more shots like that in a game, your chance of winning that game are something more than 50%. And if you're doing that consistently over a 7-game series, your chance of winning 4 of those 7 games is considerably more than 50%. Didn't happen this year, and the Oilers, Vegas had a 3% higher shooting percentage than the Oilers did, whereas all season long the Oilers were generally about 2% better than their opposition. It was a 5-point swing there, and it was just too much. And
the power plays became kind of few and far between for one of the teams. Let's leave it there, Bruce. Thanks for talking tonight. Thanks for talking tonight.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.